get into it. Man. Where is it? There we go. Beautiful. Before football starts. But other than that, how was your weekend, Andrew?
It was good. Um, yeah, we just a whole bunch of work, and yeah, I'm excited to get out there for training camp. That's gonna be like my very first outside of the city kind of experience. That'll be fun. How was
That's
yours?
a good. There, it was good. What did I do this? I went to the Met game on Saturday with one
Mm.
of my best friends. That was fun. And then yesterday, I watched the insanity of football. That was the NFL yesterday, where there were like 4 games that had 3 possession comebacks in the fourth quarter. Very good day to be lazy on the couch yesterday.
For sure. Hell yeah.
Uh, Nothing to complain about, all things
Yeah.
considered. I mean, it did start raining right now, but that doesn't really impact me
Mm.
at the moment, at least.
Yeah. We're here. We're here.
Yeah,
We have a roof over our head, luckily, and we're
yeah.
here, ready to rock and roll.
Yeah. All right. So we have a few things that we want to touch on. You'll do the pre. So we'll do Lundqvist. We'll do Pacific, and we'll talk a little bit about Vertanen separately from the preview. And I think that sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Word. If you want to read your little preamble, Mr. President.
Let's do it here. All right. Rangers fans, welcome to the best Rangers podcast in town. I am Andrew Chelney, and we are Liberty Blue alongside with Nick Zararis. Of course, we scream about the Rangers so that you can save your voice. That's how deeply we care about you, and we appreciate that you've joined us for the ride. This is episode 14, live on Twitch. We'll put the video up on our YouTube, Liberty Blue Podcast, and the audio version will be available as an audio podcast as well. Search Liberty Blue on your favorite podcast platform, if I
There
can
we go.
speak correctly. There it is. And it should be there at Liberty Blue Pod on Twitter and Instagram. I am at Chelney Andrew, Chelney Andrew, and that is Nick Zararis at Nick Zararis, Nick Zararis are our personal handles to follow as well. We tackled the Atlantic Division last week. Nick, which division is on the agenda today?
Well, we're hitting the Pacific Division, and this has been like the weakest division in the NHL for the last couple of years. It's had like 4 teams in it rebuilding all at once for quite a while. The Coyotes used to be in this division before Seattle came in, and then the Coyotes got moved to the Central, and Seattle, obviously, as an expansion team, is very much rebuilding out of the gate. The 3 California teams have all kind of been in the weeds the last couple of years, even though LA surprisingly made the playoffs last year. The Oilers are always going to be defined by what their 2 superstars can do and what the bottom 6 cannot do. The Flames were very good last year. I thought they were a cup caliber team last year. And then Vegas, to be determined. It's going to be very curious to see what they look like, and we're going to talk about all that. But Andrew brought this up, and we haven't recorded since this was in the news last week. But Nils Lundqvist is not reporting to training camp for the Rangers in hopes of facilitating a trade to somewhere where he will be able to play at the NHL level for this upcoming season. It behooves him to stay in Sweden. He will make more money playing in the Swedish league on the team he was on before he came over to North America, as opposed to playing in the AHL. I understand why his agent would advise him to stay over there. If you can facilitate a trade, great. If he just sits the year out and plays in Sweden for the year, he's a free agent at the end of the year and can sign with any team that wants him after this upcoming season. So we're not going to get too in the weeds on this because this is something Andrew and I have talked about a lot on the show. Is just the Rangers' inability to trust these young guys. They draft these guys and they either throw them into the lineup too soon. They try and stunt their growth in hopes of making them safe players as opposed to making them reach their full potential, or they don't give them enough runway to stick at the NHL level. Nils Lundqvist got 25 games in last year with the worst defenseman in the NHL last year, Patrick Nemeth, and since then, not to be heard from. There was a little bit of conjecture in mid-July that this was something that could happen, that he could choose to look for a trade. We're here. It sucks the Rangers pissed away another first-round pick. Beyond that, I mean, you're not going to get the hockey men to ever admit they made a mistake. So
Yeah, and the thing about Nils Lundqvist, and I love the discourse on Twitter from people who definitely have watched Nils Lundqvist play hockey before, is all the assumptions that, oh, he's too small to play in the NHL, which ridiculous thing to
he's the
say.
same size as Cale Makar. He's 5'11",
Yeah.
180 pounds. That's the exact same size as
It's
Cale Makar.
it's a ridiculous thing, and if anybody ever says to you that, hey, player X is too small to play in the NHL, they've never seen him play. They've never seen somebody. I've never been more confident in my saying something than if someone ever says that player X is too small to play in the NHL. They have never watched a second of this dude play hockey. Like, this is the most asinine thing to say to anybody that is looking to play in the NHL level. How do they play hockey? Are they good at hockey? Then they can play in the NHL. Are they not good at hockey? Well, then I mean, maybe they can still play in the NHL if your agent's really good. But but overall, Nils Lundqvist is someone that can play at the NHL level. Like, objectively, from people that have watched him play, and I trust these people because I haven't really seen him play in the Swedish league. He played 8 seconds at the NHL level with Patrick Nemeth at his side, so I can't really read too much into how he played the NHL level because he didn't get a chance. Oh yeah, his 4 seconds a night with Patrick Nemeth over there is really going to tell me how good Nils Lundqvist is at the NHL level. That's just not how it works. From people that have watched him play and have really scouted him, he's a solid player that can play at the NHL level. And when you are blocked by Libor Hayek and some other guy that they just signed to a PTO, yeah, I would also want to trade. If my options are I get to make $70,000 playing at some AHL league that I'm clearly too good to be playing, or make more than that at home with my team that I played with last year because I'm not going to be playing with the Rangers because Libor Hayek is blocking me. Yeah, I mean, I'd ask for a trade too. It's very understandable.
Yeah, the last thing I want to touch on with this before we start talking about the preview, because it's very easy to get bogged down on this type of. This is just pure discourse. There is, as dumb as it sounds, there's not a right or a wrong argument here, and that's part of why an argument like this can fester online forever, indefinitely. It still does. I mean, there are still people every time this gets brought up, then it goes to what about Lias Andersson, what about Vitaly Krasov, and you just get lost in the weeds. And at some point, you got to know when to stop arguing. You got to know when to stop arguing. And the last thing I'll say on this, the boxcar stats for Braden Schneider and Nils Lundqvist, basically the same thing. It's just a lot of anecdotal evidence, the eye test type stuff that people see the way Braden Schneider plays defense. They think that translates better to the NHL level. They think that's good defense. That's part of what it is. And just, you can't, as dumb as it sounds, it always feels weird when the Rangers do this kind of thing with the young guy where they don't give them runway. I mean, it took Chris Kreider, 4 years to become an NHL regular just because they didn't know what to do with him? There were times where they very much could have used him, but they were using, God knows, they were using Taylor Pyatt on the left wing in the top six or Darryl Powell was playing third line. Just let the young guys play. That was the entire point of rebuilding. Like last year, they should have let him take as many lumps as possible because they probably weren't going to be a good team. They ended up being a good team, but from a philosophy standpoint, you want to let your young guys get as much burn as possible because eventually when you're in those important games, they need to have experience. That is the real problem they're going to be in this year, and Andrew and I are going to talk about that. We will probably do a Metropolitan Division preview and then a Rangers-specific preview. We'll probably do 2 episodes in a week, something along those lines to give you guys a little bit more in-depth specific Ranger stuff and Metro at large. But let's get to the Pacific Division. That was a solid 5 to 7 minutes. I think that's a reasonable place to put the pin in that because that could be 3 hours. That could be a full 3 hours.
If we are let off the chain and just let roam the plains, we will spend the entire day arguing about Nils Lundqvist. So yes, let's move on while we still can.
Okay, so Pacific Division, the way the playoffs are set up now, I still don't like that every division gets a guaranteed 3 seeds. I still think this should be the best 8 teams make the playoffs. I feel like that's fair. The Kings were the highest point total team out of everyone left. They were ahead of what Vegas was. Anaheim had a good start. They fell off. Vancouver ran out of runway. If Vancouver had like another 2 weeks, they possibly could have gotten to that last playoff spot. So we'll start in order the way they went last year. Calgary won the Pacific Division last year. Great team last year. They lost their best player and probably their second best player in Gaudreau and Matthew Tkachuk this offseason. They have admirably filled in the gaps. Today they brought in Sonny Milano on a PTO, who's somebody I would have liked to have brought in as opposed to Jimmy Vesey, but that's another conversation for another day about what the purpose of a PTO is. Sure. But the Flames are going to be fine again. They're going to be a solid team. They're going to play that dump and chase game. I'm very excited to see if they do Noah Hannafin with Mackenzie Weegar or Kyle Chillington with Mackenzie Weegar, because either of those, and then you still have Tanev in the mix. The Flames are going to have an improved defense this year because they were without Tanev the entirety of last year. I forget what he injured. I want to say it was his back, but you have a really good top four. You're going to roll out 3 pretty solid lines, an okay fourth line, and for the first 50, 60 games of last year, Jacob Markstrom was one of the best goalies in the league. On paper, this is one of the best assembled rosters in the NHL, and that's in spite of losing 2 amazing players.
Yeah, and again, you have to credit the GM and the scouting and everybody in Calgary for what they did, because like we talked about earlier, they really had they had nothing to go for, because you have Johnny Gaudreau leaving to Columbus for absolutely nothing, and then Matthew Tkachuk was like, oh yeah, hey, I want out as well. And they did the absolute best they could, and all the credit goes to their GM staff in essentially fixing the problem as best they possibly could, and also now bringing in Nazem Kadri to really fill out that top 6. My biggest concern with Calgary, one, is Jacob Markstrom, because he was outstanding for 99% of the season. And then he gets to the playoffs, he plays Edmonton, and it looks like he wasn't like
he wasn't good.
He looks like a third string beer league goaltender. And I don't understand why that was the case when you're a goalie and you look so good for the entire way, and then you get to a certain opponent and you just forget how to stop pucks all of a sudden. To me, it's very concerning. It's a red flag in a way, because how can you play so well and then you get to an opponent that you might see year after year in the playoffs, because it's Connor McDavid and he runs the whole show, and we'll talk about them in a second. But how do you get to one specific opponent and then just break down as badly as you did? That's a concern for me. And also, if you look at their top 6 right now, the Flames are one injury away from not having any scoring depth at all. Because especially on the left wing, because Daily Faceoff right now has Jacob Peltier on the third line. I gotta be honest, I haven't really watched this man play. And then Milan Lucic is slated to play on the fourth line.
Yeah.
Really? That's your left wing? Okay, so you have Huberdeau, you have Blake Coleman. Cool, very cool. If one of those goes down, who's in your top 6? Who's it going to be? That's my concern with Calgary, because if they're healthy, yeah, they're a strong team, especially on the back end. They're going to be a team that is going to be tough to score against, and they have the potential to score a lot of goals. 1 or 2 injuries, massive problem.
Okay, so let's unpack a few of the things you brought up there. Number 1, they identified this was an issue. They went out and traded for Daniel Vladar before last season from the Bruins to be the backup goalie. He was not very good last year. That's part of the problem. You can't, when you're trying to ride a goalie throughout the course of a regular season and you make 55, 60 starts, you're going to get worn down. So that's number 1. You got to do a little bit better job of getting that closer to 50. I mean, I feel like that's your sweet spot, is 50 to 55 starts if you have a truly elite goalie. Anything more than that, you're wearing them a little thin, even if that does mean some nights you are just kind of punting the game. Less than ideal. And then stylistically, that was the issue for Calgary against Edmonton. They got into a track meet, which is not the way Calgary plays. Calgary is a dump and chase, get the puck, cycle it to the point, rebounds, deflections, ugly goals type offense. And now they're going to have to lean into that a little more without Gaudreau or Tkachuk in that creative sense, because both of those guys, amazing facilitators, great playmakers. Tkachuk, great around the net. Everybody remembers the Flames just eviscerating the Rangers early last year. I think it was 7-0 in that game, something along those lines. Tkachuk scored that goal at behind his back, just an absolute obliteration. And in that series against Edmonton, they weren't doing that. They were trying to make those high leverage plays. They were trying to get the cross crease passes, and you fall into Edmonton's trap when you turn every game into a track meet. And for Calgary going forward, assuming everything goes okay for them and they make the playoffs, it will be key for them to not fall into that same trap, to play their game. You can't play your opponent's game. That's how you get into trouble when you're a better team. Being frank, Calgary was a better team than Edmonton last year. Edmonton got them out of their element, turned that series into an up and down, back and forth, like a 9-6 kind of game. And that's not what Calgary does. Calgary, a little bit different roster composition now. Like you mentioned, a little bit shallower on the left, but most teams are one top six injury away from trouble, in all honesty, because this is a salary cap sport. But I think Calgary is well positioned. You got Daryl Sutter for, I think, one more year after this, and then it's up to him if he wants to stay. This is a team I'm not particularly worried about beyond injuries. They're pretty solid all the way through. Injuries is really the only thing that would prevent me from picking them to go pretty far in the playoffs, to be honest with you.
It just, a lot of it relies on Jacob Markstrom, because if
Yeah.
the idea is that, hey, we're going to make Markstrom play 65 games and he'll be just fine come the playoffs, that's not going to work. That's not going to slide.
Yeah.
We saw that happen last year, and if the Flames repeat that same game plan, well, it's not going to happen. It's not going to work again. So if you sit Markstrom for a couple more games, then maybe he will be more fresh come playoff time. Maybe he will stop a beach ball or two come playoff time. As again, like he was really good first round, and then he got to Edmonton, and it kind of just felt like whatever puck went his way, he just kind of let it go by. And I don't know. Like there's a lot of different reasons for that, but ultimately you need your starting goaltender to be able to stop pucks, and he just wasn't able to do that in Edmonton. And maybe if he played the same way that he had throughout the season, then it didn't matter what kind of game the Flames played, because Markstrom is back there and he's able to stop pucks from getting behind the net. But he didn't. And so ultimately, yeah, I mean the Oilers dictated the pace of the game, the pace of the game, and how it was played, and how, you know, the back and forth action, everything in Calgary was just out of its element. But ultimately, you really need your goaltender to play the same way, because ultimately, like, hey, if you have a goaltender that plays the same exact way throughout the entire season, and they get to a playoff series and they poo the bed, it's a problem.
Okay, speaking of the team that beat them, the Oilers, they went in a very interesting direction this offseason. This team has been capped out basically for the last 3 years, basically, and they are kind of in the same boat as Toronto, where they are just constantly recycling the deck chairs in the bottom six and the defense to make as much money fit as possible, because they have so much money tied up in just a handful of players. They bought the Evander Kane fool's gold. He will probably put up okay counting stats for them, but his game is not what it was a couple of years ago. And just the consequences, the bad karmic energy that comes from bringing people like him, bringing people like Jake Virtanen, people like Duncan Keith, bringing that into your organization over time wears away on people. And it's going to end up, the Oilers will make the playoffs barring disaster, because the Pacific Division is not good. This roster is very, very top heavy. The defense is a massive concern. You have no idea what you are going to get from Jack Campbell as your starter, because similar to Markstrom, very good the first half of the season, then played through an injury the second half of the season, wasn't great. Okay in the playoffs, wasn't the reason the Leafs lost in the playoffs, but he wasn't as good as he was the first half of the regular season. This is an okay team. They'll make the playoffs, but unless, again, McDavid can very well go Super Saiyan like he did last year and steal you a round or two. But beyond that, there isn't a plan here to improve the roster dramatically. There isn't a way to. I mean, they're going to dump Jesse Puljujarvi at some point in the next couple of weeks to fit the rest of the roster under the salary cap, because I still believe they're a little bit over at the moment.
Yeah, and then they also signed Jake Virtanen to a PTO, and yeah. There's a lot of things you could say about Jake Virtanen, and I don't know, maybe don't sign the guy. How about, I feel like that shouldn't be something that needs to be said. And yet here we are with the Oilers now signing Evander Kane to a lot of money, and now they've signed Jake Virtanen to a PTO. And if he plays for the team come regular season or not, it kind of doesn't matter right now. What needs to be said is that the Oilers kind of don't care.
Yeah.
That's very apparent. I feel like that the Oilers do not care what you've done off the ice. They don't care how it looks to other people what you've done on the ice. They don't care about much of anything besides what happens on the ice. And to a
And you
certain
could even
extent,
say that with Virtanen because he
he's
wasn't
not
good.
very good.
He had 16 points in 40 games in the KHL, and that's the guy.
Yeah.
Sonny Milano. You could have brought in Sonny
Yeah.
Milano on the exact same thing. And Sonny Milano was decent in the NHL last year. It's just, this reeks of a favor. That honestly, that's what somebody asked Ken Holland, can you give him a chance? And that's what this reeks of. This is somebody looking out for somebody else as opposed to looking out for the good of the organization, which is the entire point of your general manager. You're supposed to have a philosophy and a view for your team. And when you're just bringing people in who, even though not criminally charged, charges were acquitted, that does not mean everything was above board in that situation. That something in that situation did not go right, and that is why he was in that situation. And just as a rule of thumb, if somebody continually puts themselves in those types of situations, you don't deserve the benefit of the doubt anymore. If you are repeatedly accused of just being a bad person, generally, I'm going to believe you are a bad person, even if you're not put in jail, if you're not sentenced to anything.
With Evander Kane, at the very least, the argument can be made that he is good at scoring goals. I don't particularly like the argument, but at least the idea from the other side of the room here is that Evander Kane can put up points, and the Oilers desperately need more players that can put up points. With Jake Virtanen, he's just not very good. So the idea that he can make your team better, I don't buy that. And
Yeah.
if he didn't really put up numbers in Russia, then what makes you think that he could just come back to the NHL and help out your team? You know the PR nightmare that you already have a PR nightmare in Evander Kane. At least he could score goals for you, I guess. Jake Botanic can't do that. So now you have two PR nightmares on your team, one of which can't really do much for you anyway. So this really just, I don't understand this. There's so many other players like Sonny Milano, like you just said, that are out there just waiting for an opportunity. Even fringe players. Like, there are players out there that just want a chance. And of all the players that are out there, you give it to Jake Virtanen? Really?
There are only so many spots in the NHL. This is the argument you get into with the people who are anonymous, who have a bunch of numbers after their ats. It's not a right to play in the NHL. Even if you're not convicted of a crime, it's a privilege. There are X number of spots in the league. You do anything to jack that up, there are thousands of people who would not be in that situation to begin with who would like that opportunity. It's mind-boggling that the Oilers are still it's mind-boggling that Ken Holland still has this job. I know he hasn't been there all of that long, but just these roster decisions are just illogical. I mean, they are so desperate for offense. They brought in Evander Kane last year because the Sharks got rid of him because whatever voided his contract, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I forget the legalese explanation for it, but they were that desperate. They were like, okay, we'll eat the medicine. We got to make the playoffs. Otherwise, everyone gets fired. Okay. And now your plan is to do the exact same thing again and hope Connor McDavid turns into, a Mario Kart driver when they get the star. That's basically what the Oilers' plan is when they to beat good teams. That's the only reason they got past Calgary was McDavid was incredible. I mean, that's their plan. Beyond that, I mean, I like some of the I like Evan Bouchard, the defenseman. He's been there a little while. He hasn't really broken through yet. Similar in the mold of Noah Dobson, where they've been slow playing him forever because they have money tied up in other defensemen. But they give him some burn. I think he'll be all right. Tyson Berry is a luxury, overly expensive third pair guy who's making, I think, 5-something million a year. The Oilers playoff team, beyond that, I just don't see it.
They're going to make it off the back of Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, but other than that, I mean, Jack Campbell is better than Mike Smith and Mikko Koskinen for sure, but that's also just not a very high bar to climb over. Are they better than they were? I guess by virtue of having somebody that can play goalie that will stop pucks every now and again. But ultimately, this is more or less the same built team that they were last season. And you can argue, well, they made it far in the playoffs because of that.
Yeah.
But that's because of McDavid.
Yes.
That's because of McDavid and Draisaitl. They don't have 4 lines that they can put on the ice and say, hey, go out there and score a goal, will you? Like, they don't have that, and they probably never will as long as Kenny Holland's there and in charge of the roster. Like, they just don't have the depth. They don't, like, if Connor McDavid, I hope this doesn't happen, but let's say he goes down with an injury and he's out. Like, let's say this happens in like February. I don't know. And he goes down for 2 months, 2.5 months, 3 months. Are you telling me that this Oilers team can manage? Because the answer is a fat no. Fat no. They rely on Connor McDavid scoring 100 points a night for them to win games. And that's it. That's the whole plan. That is the entire game plan. If Andrew Kane can score one every now and again, you have a couple of other guys that can score sometimes. But overall, if Connor McDavid goes down, the ship sinks immediately, pretty much. So that's not how you build a championship team. It's not how you do it in the NHL. So Kenny Holland built a playoff team, probably. Okay. Now what? That's it. Like, you are not going to win the Stanley Cup with a roster that is built the way that Edmonton's roster is built. That's plain and simple. And no matter how many goals Connor McDavid scores any given night, ultimately you need more than Connor McDavid to win you playoff games.
Yeah, basically. That's really what it comes down to. They just don't have the depth. The third and fourth line for the Oilers for years now have just been a rotation of deck chairs in the Titanic, of warm bodies. They can play 12 minutes a night, and then 10 minutes to go if the game is close. They put McDavid and Draisaitl on the same line together, and if they're chasing, they're going out every 2-3 shifts to try and get that goal back. That is the big plan for them. Next up on this list I have here, we have the LA Kings, who made the playoffs last year kind of by accident. Very much would admit, if you ask them, yeah, we're kind of in a rebuilding year, and they still made the playoffs. Didn't have Drew Doughty for most of the season. Jonathan Quick was fine. Beyond that, they traded for Kevin Fiala, who I've always liked his game. I'm very curious to see if Byfield will stick. I assume he will this time around. I'm curious if Alex Turcotte will get an opportunity to stick. But this is still a team, I think the Kings are kind of where the Rangers were last year, where they need to see what these young guys are a little bit more before they can start being more aggressive in additions. Adding Fiala for what they got him for, great move. He's a very good player. You play him with somebody with a little bit of upside, they'll be okay. I don't think they'll be great, but I think they'll be close to what they were last year, a little better. I mean, they're heading in the right direction. I think that's ultimately your goal if you're the Kings. Just keep churning in the right direction, and then when the opportunity strikes to be aggressive, to go out and get final pieces to be a contender, then you strike. But I still think the Kings are probably a year or two away from being in that position.
They have really good young pieces to the team, and Kevin Fiala, as you mentioned, is a very good addition. That's somebody that they can slot into the top 6, and that they were missing. They were really missing a piece of that offense and that dynamic ability to change a game if called upon in their top 6. Now they have that. But as you mentioned, the question that I have is, if they make the playoffs, now what are they going to do? Because, okay, like if they are in playoff contention, or if they are close to playoff contention, are they going to buy? And if they are going to buy, then I would imagine that they are going to leverage some of their ample young talent and young pieces and draft picks at their disposal to bring in players that can play right now. Okay, so now you do that. Now you're doing what the Rangers are doing in terms of, hey, like we have a lot of players that not all of them are going to play for us. So here's player X, player Y, and player Z. Thanks, appreciate you appreciate your time, appreciate everything that you've done, but see you later. And we're gonna bring in somebody else that can play right now, and that's fine. Like that's okay, but just it depends on what the Kings' vision for this team is, because you can be too passive about it. You can hold on to every single piece and player and all that, like you're Danny Ainge and you're just collecting trading cards, or you can move on from some of them knowing that they're not all going to play for your team. They're not all game changing players that can get into the NHL and dominate. Like not every single player is a generational player, and you don't. There's only 18 spaces on your team to play at any given moment. So eventually, you are going to have to move on for some of these players and some of these other assets that you have. So if the Kings want to be aggressive here, if they're close to sniffing around the playoffs, if they're in a playoff spot and they get aggressive, it'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays, because you know Jonathan Quick is another year older. Cal Peterson, is he really somebody that can step in and be the long-term solution for the Kings and their goaltending? Because if the day Jonathan Quick decides to retire, it's Cal Peterson, and then that's it.
Yeah.
That's the answer. That's it. That the clap is the answer. Like that's it, because that's all you have. You need, if the long term plan for the Kings, you need to have a goaltender that is up and coming, that is going to take over from Jonathan Quick. Because if the answer is Cal Peterson, I don't know what the vision is for the LA Kings. He's a fine goaltender, but is he somebody that is good enough to take over the reins of Jonathan Quick if and when he retires? The answer to me is probably no. So you need somebody to come in and fill that long term roadmap that you have for this core that you've built. And so far, they haven't found one, or at least that I'm not aware of. Maybe there's one that's in the juniors right now that I have never seen because I don't watch the juniors. I'm very honest about that. I don't watch the juniors. I don't watch European hockey. I, I work in basketball. I have an NHL podcast. Like, there's only so much sporting I can do in a given day. Like, I can't watch all these people. I rely on people that watch these people to tell me if they're going to be good or not. I rely on other people for like junior information. So
Yeah.
maybe there is one in down the line for the LA Kings that can take over for Jonathan Quick. But at that point, will it be too late? I don't know.
They're still probably a year or two away. They're getting there. The defense is kind of a mess, but the forward group, they have a lot of promising young forwards who are interesting. Getting aggressive and adding Fiala for not that much. I think he was only a first round pick in the trade. That's not bad at all for somebody who can give you 35 goals. That's pretty good. Next up, Vegas. They had the egg on the face year last year.
Yep.
They most aggressive. I don't know if it's feasible to build an NHL roster the way you build an NBA roster, which is what Vegas attempted to do last year when they traded for Eichel, and they had basically half of their salary cap tied up in four guys. And this roster, again, is extremely top heavy. At the moment, they only have 6 defensemen and 13 forwards listed on their cap friendly under contract. They're going to be very thin again. I mean, there were points last year where they were having to sit good players, legitimately good players, because they were not cap compliant. And you get another year later, you had to trade away Max Pacioretty for nothing because you didn't have the cap space to field a team. Your goalie, Robin Lehner, is going to be out for the entire season, more than likely. Hip injury. Hip injuries for goalies, very troublesome, very worrisome for your roster planning, considering how much they invested in him, giving him a long-term extension. This is a very talented group, but Mark Stone hasn't been healthy in 2 years. Riley Smith is still there. That I can say that much. I don't know what Jack Eichel is going to be this year. I assume he will be better. He's still got to get the rust off. I mean, he got in 40 games, 30-something games last year. He didn't look as dynamic, but you got to still give him a reasonable amount of time to build himself back up. They will probably end up being a playoff team, but there are too many question marks about Vegas right now to say anything too confidently beyond they're probably a playoff team, because they're coming into this season with Brisson, Aiden Hill, and Michael Hutchinson as their three goalies.
Good luck.
That's not exactly inspiring a ton of confidence.
No. And also, I saw a report earlier today that Nolan Patrick might not play this season. So if he's out as well, and if that does end up becoming true, that's just awful luck, right? Like,
Yeah.
ultimately, you can't predict somebody. You can't predict a player's health long term or even short term for that matter. But Nolan Patrick has just had the worst luck with his health. He's had concussion issues. He's had other issues, and none of that's his fault. And I feel like some people kind of forget about that. Like, hey, if he had the choice of having concussions or other health injuries and not, the answer, that he would choose is no. I'd rather not have these issues. Thank you very much. I'd rather just play hockey like I've been wanting to for my entire life, and especially with all these games that I've sat out for all these years in Philadelphia, now in Vegas as well. So now you're down Nolan Patrick, probably, if that report is true. So now you're really struggling for any kind of depth scoring, because now you really need
Brett Howden. They're fine.
Yeah, Rangers legend Brett Howden. Well, the problem with the team that Vegas has set up right now is that you really are going to have to score 8 goals a game to win, because you don't have Robin Lehner, you don't have any goaltending support much at all. Like, I don't trust Aiden Hill, really. I don't trust Michael Hutchinson. I don't trust pretty much anybody they have right now in between the pipes. So you're gonna have to score a lot to win games, and do they really have the ability to score 8 goals every single night? Jack Eichel can score, Riley Smith can score, Mark Stone can score if he's healthy, but your bottom 6, Nolan Patrick's not playing. Is Phil Kessel gonna score you 30 goals? I don't know. I mean, he's gonna score. Like, I still think he could play at the NHL level. I kind of like him more than other people do. I still think he's an NHL player. I think he's going to do at least decently well on the offense. I'll wait and see how he plays defensively, of course. But I still think he's a serviceable player at the NHL level. But overall, my biggest concerns with the Vegas Golden Knights is, okay, well, if Jack Eichel is not scoring, your 2 top lines aren't scoring, you're going to get probably destroyed, because the goaltending isn't great, and nobody on your bottom 6 is really going to put up a lot of points. So now what? Now for Vegas, they should be, if they're not already, probably in panic mode.
I'm very curious to see how Bruce Cassidy's hiring changes the dynamic a little bit, because they, for the first couple of years of their existence under Gallant and under DeBoer as well, very up and down tempo style of team, looking to score off the counterattack, which is not the way Bruce Cassidy coaches teams. Under Bruce Cassidy, the Bruins have been the best or the second best defensive team in terms of quality of chances against pretty much the entirety of his time as head coach in Boston. I'm very curious to see if Vegas is going to undergo a little bit of an identity change, if they're going to be a little bit more of a defense-oriented team, kind of like what the Bruins have been under Bruce Cassidy. And that's not to say they won't score. The Bruins obviously scored a lot of goals under Bruce Cassidy, but if you can get your defense to be a net positive in a league where very few teams have a net positive defense, I think that alone justifies the hiring. Even if you end up in that same, we're out in the second round every single year, I do think Bruce Cassidy's a good coach.
Yeah, I like Bruce Cassidy a lot. I don't agree with the Bruins firing him. I don't really think the Bruins' inefficiencies to win against the Flames, not the Flames, the Hurricanes, really got it. I don't like that. I don't think it's fair to say, oh, well, the Bruins lost because of Bruce Cassidy. I'm not a fan of that thought process. I don't agree with it. So we talked about it with the Bruins last week. It kind of just smelled like the Bruins management saving themselves as opposed to what makes the team better. And I don't like that. I think that's just that's not how you build a winning hockey team. So yeah, you for Bruce Cassidy, you come into Vegas now, and I kind of don't know what to expect from them from a coaching standpoint, just because of, like, okay, well, Bruce left a really fundamentally sound team. Now he's coming into an organization with as goaltending. and at bottom six as well. So he is really going to have to get creative here and really get as much as he possibly can out of his depth forwards and even his goaltenders, because that's if anybody of those three can just be average or at least like decent, like just play decent, then the Vegas Golden Knights have a really good chance of making the playoffs, especially in this division. But if the goalies are anything like I fear that they are, you could bring any coach behind that bench, and I kind of don't think they'll be much of a difference maker.
Next up, Vancouver, who I think if they had just fired their coach like a couple weeks earlier last year, probably could have made the playoffs. Every single person on hockey Twitter knew they were going to have to fire him in season. It was just a matter of when. They waited until December. If they fired, why can't I think? Travis Green. If they fired Travis Green in November and gave Bruce Boudreau an extra like 2 weeks, the Canucks probably would have made the playoffs, because once Bruce took over, the defense still wasn't good, but they were generating a lot more offense, and that was without Elias Pettersson like playing at all the entire second half of the season. You really saw the best season of JT Miller's career. I'm very curious to see if they can ride the interim coach boom into a second season, which just historically is very difficult. It's always, usually whenever you fire a coach in season, you have an interim coach, you get a little bit of a bump at some point during the season just from having a new voice in the room that spurs a little bit of positivity. The energy being a little bit better makes the team's performance better. I want to see the Canucks be just good. That is a tortured and anguished fan base that has suffered through a lot. They have a lot of good players. Goaltending, you've got Demko, who has shown the ability to be very good at this level. The defense is going to be a mess. The Canucks are never boring. I can say that much. If you put the Canucks on, you will be entertained. I remember they were playing, I think it was Calgary at one point last year, and they were down a goal, and I was flicking through the scores on one of the apps I use to check scores, and I saw, okay, they got a power play. Okay, I'll put it on, and I just watched Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, Brock Besser. I watched their top power play unit just whip the puck around like the Harlem Globetrotters, and I was wondering, why are they not better? They have all of this high-end talent, all of these guys who are really good. And then I watched them lose in overtime because there was one person back, and it was a 3-on-1, and Demko didn't have a chance on the did
Sure.
not have a chance on the 3-on-1. This is a decent team. I think the Canucks will have a decent chance of making the playoffs this year. They're just going to need to outscore every single game. That's really all they can do, though. The defense is bad.
Let me read you. Speaking of the defense, let me read you the right side for the Vancouver
Tyler
Canucks.
Myers. Do they still have Tucker Pullman?
They do.
There's one more.
There is one more.
Is it Rathbone? No, he's somewhere else now. Why can't I think of who is it?
So the top two defensemen that is currently projected on Daily Faceoff right now, alongside Quinn Hughes, is Philadelphia Flyers legend Luke Schenn.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah.
That's their entire right side, at least at the NHL level.
So
Luke Schenn, Tyler Myers, and Tucker Pullman. That's it.
One of the things I was reading about in The Athletic the other day is that the Canucks have been working on playing Hughes on the right so that they can address that left-right imbalance and, in theory, not just be, Luke Schenn, Tucker Pullman, and Tyler Myers.
You know what would have been a really good way to combat that issue? Not trading and not signing Tyler Myers to that ludicrous contract that they signed him to.
Yeah.
Or maybe not signing Tyler Myers at all, because other than he is just not very good at hockey. Maybe don't do that,
I don't disagree with you. They'll be fun. If nothing else, the Canucks will be fun this year. I also read that to start the year, Boudreau is thinking of doing JT Miller, Bo Horvat, Pettersson as the three centers and playing maybe their most dynamic player as their third line center, which is a very Rangers thing to do. So I'm curious to see if they stick with that or if they move Pettersson back to the wing. There's a lot of talent on this team. I want to see Vasily Podkolzin's year too. I have a lot of just admiration for the Canucks because I have so many Canuck fan friends and they're very funny, just to be honest with you. The Canucks are a funny organization.
One of the other things that kind of scared me here about the Canucks is that because Demko can't play every game, right?
No.
There's no under no situation is Demko going to play 82 games, and if he does play 82 games, by the time he gets to the playoffs, it's going to be a broken disaster. You have Spencer Martin as your backup goalie. That's who you're supporting Thatcher Demko with. And again, like we talk about these players, and I mention it pretty much every week. But I just it's important to mention that when we talk about players, we talk about them on the ice. I'm not going after Spencer Martin individually. I'm not going after Luke Shen as a human being. I'm referring to specifically and only their on ice play. So when when I say Spencer Martin is Thatcher Demko's cushion here, and like that's who you have to support him, I'm not speaking of him as a person. I'm saying his on ice performance doesn't scream I'm a capable backup goaltender to Thatcher Demko, and if he needs an extended rest, I got it, I'll take care of it. I don't have faith in Spencer Martin at this stage to be a reliable backup goalie for Thatcher Demko. So if Demko needs to play 60, 65 games because you don't have a second goalie, but come playoffs, you're going to see what happened to Jacob Markstrom, where he just fell apart. And that's another concern that I have with Vancouver, on top of their, you said it very well. Their funny defense. Their backup goalie situation is a big red flag for me. If Demko needs a rest, or hopefully this doesn't happen, but if he gets injured, now what? Now you really don't have anybody to fill in. Now you're going to scramble for a trade. That's always messy.
I think you just play with an empty net the entire game.
Yeah, you might as well just play with 6 forwards the whole game, because if that happens, that's I don't say the season's over, because Spencer Martin could all out of nowhere just do an Andrew Hammond and have a .930 save percentage for the entire way. But I would bet against that, because that's just not the norm, and I kind of don't have a whole lot of faith in that at the moment. But that's kind of my on top of the defense, which is, I mean, my God, man, Tyler Myers, massive contract, massive player. That's about it, though.
They brought in Danny DeKaiser on a PTO as well.
Sure. So, yeah, that'll do it. That's fine.
Next up, Seattle. I'm just curious to see if they can get some positive offensive regression. I know most people, when they think of statistical regression, they think of coming back down to the mean. Seattle's offense needs to go up to the mean because of how badly it underperformed last year. Both of the goalies were very bad. I'm curious to see if they can get a little bit of better luck there. I like the moves. Burakovsky's a good player. Bjorkstrand's a good player. They can't possibly be as bad as they were last year, just because the averages of statistics don't allow that to happen. I think even if, standings wise, they're still towards the bottom, they'll at least be better production wise. And you get the plus of maybe Matty Beniers and maybe Shane Wright make the team, and then you have a little bit of juice on top of that. So Seattle, very much a wait and see. Positive regression, hopefully. That's really all they got. Dave Hackstall as a coach does not inspire a ton of confidence.
They can't possibly be as bad as they were in their first season, and if only because they pretty much added a whole new line to the team after the season was over. Because now you have Matty Beniers, who I would imagine is going to make the team, and I would imagine also that Shane Wright will as well. So now you add those two guys, right? And now you also have Oliver Bjorkstrand, who's a very good player who got traded for a bag of donuts, not a bag of donuts, a box of donuts, and Andre Burakovsky, who is not a hot and cold player, but he can provide some really good things for the Seattle Kraken sometimes. They at least have new faces in this organization that can do damage for them. So I think ultimately, even if Philip Grubauer is as bad as he was last season, which again I don't think, there's no way he's going to be as bad as he was. There's just no way, because he was really good in Colorado. And yes, I understand that, the team in front of him was so much better, yada, yada, yada. He was just brutal in this first season in Seattle. And there's no way he repeats that same level of I'm down bad. He can't be down worse. I don't believe it. In my heart of hearts, I don't believe it. So
it's hard.
Yeah, he's gonna be at least marginally better. The defense is the biggest problem because you have Justin Schultz, who you brought in, and you have some good pieces as well. But overall, Daily Faceoff right now is projecting Carson Soucy and William Borgen to be their third pairing, and I don't know about that. Like, they're very thin on the blue line, and that's really where my concerns come in. Because if Jamie Alexiak goes down, if Vince Dunn goes down, now you're really scratching the bottom of the barrel for any kind of help on the blue line, unless you trade. I wish you could say the same thing about any of these teams. Really, like they're always a trade away from fixing their team per se. But as it stands right now, they're thin on the blue line. But I do like the their offensive depth at least a lot more than I did last season. Right now, they look like a serviceable NHL team because
Yeah, they were not
they were very
offensively.
serviceable. But now this year, at least when they come play your team, you should be at least a little bit scared. Like at least the last season when Seattle came in, especially towards the tail end of the season, I'm not saying don't take them seriously because these guys are NHL players and they will beat you if you do not take them seriously. Same with any bad team in the NHL. They have been known to surprise teams. They have been known to beat up on really good teams that kind of think that they can just slide by and win an easy game. But for the Seattle Kraken right now, I think they're going to be a much more formidable team. I don't think playoffs are in the cards, but I definitely think they'll be closer to that mark than they were last season because I just don't think Grubauer can be down worse than his first season in Seattle.
Yeah, no, him and Chris Drieger were both like 880 goalies, which, I mean, Drieger's sample was one NHL season, but he was like 910 the 1 year in Florida. And Grubauer, going back to his time in Washington, has always pretty consistently been a 910, 915 goalie. He had one 920 year in there with Colorado before he got hurt during the course of the playoffs that year, but they should be better. That's really all you can ask for. You're an expansion team in year two. Get Matt Beniers, get Shane Wright as much ice time as you possibly can. And a year from now, maybe we're talking about them the way we're talking about the Kings, where they just go out and add one or two more veteran guys. They could very much be in the mix. They still have a little bit of cap space to play with. Two to go. We're going down to California. Ducks, aggressive in the offseason. They supplemented what was a shockingly good team. I know at one point they were in first place in the Pacific Division last year because everybody got out of the gate very, very slowly. The Oilers obviously fired their coach during the course of the season. The Flames had the really bad COVID outbreak at the start of the year where they had like 19 of the 22 people in the organization on the COVID list at one point. So it took them a little while to get their season going. But the Ducks were entertaining last year. Jamie Drysdale as a defenseman, pretty good. Zegras, the one of the new faces of the NHL, has
Right.
shown some
Just
flash.
don't tell Torts. Don't tell John Tortorella.
Oh, that'll be funny. The first Flames Ducks game, the first Ducks Flyers game, because
Yeah.
somebody will ask him a stupid question
Right.
about that. That'll be very funny.
Right.
They're gonna get Mason McTavish, who was very good for Canada in the World Juniors, and I assume he'll stick this time around. They signed our old friends Ryan Strome and Frank Vetrano. They brought in Dmitry Kulikov. They brought in John Klingberg on a 1 year prove it deal. This was the offseason of a team that like thinks they could probably make the playoffs, to be honest with you. That's what these moves tell me. I don't know how realistic that is. John Gibson hasn't been great the last year, 2 years. He is getting older. Goalies don't age particularly well. I hope the Ducks are entertaining because it's good for the league when the team with all of the young guys is good as opposed to just being fun. But this was an aggressive offseason for them.
For the Anaheim Ducks, my biggest question mark for them is the goaltending, and that's not because of John Gibson, because we know John Gibson can be good if he doesn't have to play every single game. But the problem with Anaheim is that they played him every game for a
For
very
5 years.
long time. Yeah, like that's they played him in a lot of games that they didn't have to play him, but because they really had nobody else, they put him out there. They sent him out there anyway, and that is one of the things that has really broken down John Gibson over the years. Is not his defense deteriorating in front of him, which is true as well, but he played game in and game out and game in and game out. And that is a problem when you are a goaltender that has injury concerns or injury problems, is that the more you play, the more likely you are to develop either short-term or long-term injury concerns. And it doesn't get any better. I mean, like his backup goalie is Anthony Stolarz. And it's just kind of the same thing with Vancouver. Is like
Yeah.
that's who you got. John Gibson, has injury concerns. John Gibson cannot play every game for you. He just simply cannot do it. So you go out and you get Anthony Stolarz as your number 2 goalie.
Okay, so
That's it.
there are 32 teams in the NHL. There's like 25 good goalies, and then they still all need a backup goalie, which is it's like quarterbacks in the NFL. There are only X number of good ones. There are so many teams, and then you still need a backup on top of that just in case. It is a real issue across the league for most teams. The Rangers are riding the backup goalie carousel for the first time in quite a while this year, which is something we're going to be a little more worried about. Last team we got to get to here, San Jose. I have no idea what they're doing. I don't know why they kept Tomas Hertl.
Sure.
They're not going to be a playoff team this year. They could have gotten a lot for Tomas Hertl, who is a very good player. They got rid of Brent Burns after forever. They still have that Erik Karlsson contract, which is basically immovable because I think he's the highest paid defenseman in the league. They still have Marc-Edouard Vlasic under contract for 4 more years, which is ridiculous.
It might as well be a million years at this point. Yeah.
They're going into the year with Capo Kakkonen and James Reiner as their goalies.
Sure.
This is a lottery team. This is a Connor Bedard lottery team.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The Sharks are not gonna go anywhere. This is a team that doesn't know what to do. This is a team that has
they waited too long.
They did, and they had all this time to figure out what they want to do. They know that they took too long to figure it out, and they still have no idea what they're going to do. And that's kind of the worrying part of the Sharks franchise right now in the direction of their organization, is because they don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And that to me is the more pressing concern with them, is that, okay, well, you still have Karlsson, you have the Marc-Edouard Vlasic jersey and the contract, because my man's unfortunately just cannot play anymore. Or I mean, you put him out there, he's there, he's
getting
skating.
Cardio in.
He's getting his cardio in. He's doing things. I don't know if they're good or not, but he's definitely out there doing the things that he tries to do on a given night. And it's unfortunate because Marc-Edouard Vlasic for such a long period of time was a very solid defenseman. He was on Team Canada for so many years. He was a really great defenseman for such a long time. But now the only reason why they still put him out there is, one, his contract is ridiculous, and two, they don't really have anybody else to put out there. So you have Erik Karlsson on one leg, and you have Marc-Edouard Vlasic, and your entire forward group is Tomas Hertl, Timo Meier, and Logan Couture. That's it. Now go ahead and win 50 games to make the playoffs.
Good luck.
That's it. And we just got a notification that Nils Lundqvist is going to Dallas.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Okay. Interesting. Breaking news here on Liberty Blue Pod. Shayna Goldman of The Athletic is reporting that the Dallas Stars are trading for Nils Lundqvist. Now, we don't know what the return is.
I would guess picks. I would guess a pick.
I would
sucks. It sucks if it's a pick.
Yeah.
You need a roster player for him.
Yeah, and this is kind of like one of the downsides of me only having one monitor to look at. Well, I guess again, if I'm looking like here or here, I have my whole camera setup is kind of wonky right now. Like I have my camera down here, but I have my notes and everything up here, so I'm kind of like looking in all different directions. But I have one monitor, so I don't have Twitter open because then I could be staring at my phone down here, and I wouldn't be looking at the camera. I would be looking at Nick. So I'm just kind of looking at my phone right now. I am seeing the tweet. I don't know what the return is going to be. Hopefully, it's going to be more than a pick, because the rumor for a while now is that Lundqvist is going to be traded for a second round pick, and but it's not enough for me, because from everything that I've heard from people that like Nils Lundqvist a lot and like his
The
game.
problem is the Rangers don't have cap because he's an
Yeah,
ELC, so it would have to be somebody. I'm looking at their roster right now. Who else is an ELC? Jacob Peterson is an ELC. They could fit Caravanta. He's only $1 million. Defense. Thomas Harley is an ELC defenseman. They don't have a lot of guys who would make sense that are on the roster right now, unless it's a prospect who's not unless it's somebody in the pipeline who's on an ELC. They really only have 3 or 4 guys on the roster right now that would make it work money wise, because the Rangers have like no money.
the more I think about it, it just
The Rangers have $1 million in cap space.
yeah.
I just pulled up the cap friendly. They have $1
the
million
Rangers
flat.
and the Rangers don't really have a whole lot of leeway to work with here. Unfortunately, like again, we don't have the tweet. We don't have the full report out yet. We just have the Shayna tweet that it sounds like he's going to be going to the Dallas Stars. Maybe they figure out a bigger trade, but at this stage of the game, I kind of doubt that a little bit. If it's just Nils Lundqvist, it's probably just for a pick and return, which I don't like. I really wouldn't be a fan of that, and I'm still, staring at my trying to look at you and also trying to look at Twitter at the same time. But it would be, I would think it'd be frustrating if all the Rangers got for Nils Lundqvist is another pick, because they did that with Elias Anderson. They've done this before. They're like, this is another ring around the rosy situation where there's only like how many picks are going to ask out, and how many picks are going to end up being traded for more picks, until you figure out like, hey, maybe it's not the picks. Maybe it's something that we're doing wrong. But hey, I mean, I don't know. If I was a Rangers organization, maybe I wouldn't have Libor Hayek blocking Nils Lundqvist from playing hockey games. But hey, I'm not the GM of the New York Rangers, and I'm not Jimmy Dolan. So hey, what do I know?
All right. That's it for the Pacific Division preview. We talked about Jake Virtanen a little bit before, and just really quickly, this is what Andrew and I are talking about when we talk about the NHL insider culture. For, Elliot Friedman to just retweet the transaction from the Oilers instead of saying something about it. Pretty much anybody adding any additional context to this about why he was in Russia last year, why he is getting a PTO as opposed to a guaranteed contract. All of these little things. It's a culture of complacency. It is bad. It is making the game worse. It makes people feel unwelcome, and that defeats the entire purpose. The entire point of sports media is to spread messaging so people want to be a part of it. If you're telling people that, well, he wasn't convicted, he was charged, but he wasn't convicted, that's enough for us. You're sending a bad message to people. That's really what this comes down to.
It happens across all sports as well. The NHL is no stranger to controversy. The NFL, you could argue, does a much worse job at that kind of thing, where I saw, because I went to the Jets and Ravens game, the first one not this past weekend, but week 1. I saw people wearing Ray Lewis jerseys. Listen, I get this man won you a Super Bowl. My man's committed murder. Maybe don't wear that jersey in public. I don't know. Like, I get it. I get this dude won you a Super Bowl. I get it. Terrific. Maybe don't wear the jersey, man. Like, people, like, it just goes to show that people are okay with anything you do, as long as you are somebody in sports that brings your team success. Like, if the Oilers clearly think that Jake Virtanen can lead them to the promised land, because if they wouldn't, then they wouldn't have brought him on with PTO. And for the check marks, again, to put out, this idea that, okay, we're going to be better. We're going to be better about all of this, and how we're going to be, fighting the this and the that's, and only to just retweet that the Oilers are signing Jake Virtanen to a PTO without any sort of additional thought or additional context or additional anything. It's really disappointing to see, because you would think that after everything that's gone on, after everything that they claimed to have said, and everything that they wanted to project, that, hey, we're going to be better, we're going to be more outspoken, and only to just turn around and retweet it. It's I think it's gross. I think I like there's no like, we shouldn't beat around the bush here. Like, there's media outlets that will just kind of avoid this, but ultimately you need to be upfront with it. You have to be objective about this and say, hey, you literally just said a few minutes ago that you were going to be more outspoken and you're going to push back against this, and yet here you are, Jake Virtanen, to the Oilers, and you just retweet it. You don't say anything at all. I I don't like
It's
it.
frustrating. It's
Yeah.
very frustrating. All right, let's get out of here. I'm gonna go text my friend who works for their NHL.com and see if he knows what they got. Let's. We will see you all next week. We're doing the Central Division next week, which is probably the best division in hockey. It will be a very good episode. We will have to pre-record it because both Andrew and I have stuff next Monday. Not sure about that, but we'll be back. Then the following week, Metropolitan Division, Ranger specific preview. We're trying to get a guest. We have a few in mind. If the first one doesn't work out, we might be able to squeeze. I think I have another idea, and we'll talk about it after we're done with this.
Oh,
I have somebody else in mind who could work if we can't get the person we talked about last week.
cool.
Be sure to check out the show's feeds on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Twitch, Liberty Blue Pod on Instagram and Twitter, Liberty Blue Podcast on YouTube and Twitch. That's Andrew Chelney. His personal handle is Chelney Andrew, Chelney. Mine is at Nick Zararis, Nick, Zararis. Be sure to follow those. We will see you guys next week. We'll talk about the Central Division. Do better, hockey media.
Do better.